Hi, my name is Mary Jabalisco and welcome to our latest video. What we will be doing in this video is painting the featured painting together step by step. Be sure that you have read through the material and you've assembled your supplies. If you need any supplies, you can of course go to kingsland.com and we'll be happy to send them to you. So get out your materials and let's get started. The brushes that you see on the screen are the brushes that we'll be using. Different types of brushes. One, filberts, and the filberts are really great for painting of flowers. Notice the shape of a filbert is very similar to that of a flat, except it doesn't have any corners to it. And one thing about a filbert also is that it just echoes the shape of a flower. So it's just a great brush to use. These brushes are short versus long-haired filberts. But the filament is very soft but springy, so it doesn't flop around or go limp. So it's a great brush to use for oil or Genesis, or wherever you need a brush. It's a little bit more fuller bodied. The next set of brushes over mops, and what a mop is used for is it's a refining tool. It's to smooth an area that you want extremely smooth. We'll use it to smooth out some areas of the painting, maybe go back to a pivot point. You can also take the mop and you can pounce with it, going up and down, and that'll blend a stubborn blending area, and it'll also add a surface patina if that's something that you're looking for. Then the next brush is over. This is a script brush and this is a detail brush. The script brush is great for making lines. What you do with this brush is you load it fully, and then the back of the brush acts as a reservoir, and then the tip actually feeds the paint. And so you'll have to work with the correct consistency of paint. And you use this quite a bit, basically to draw lines or any kind of line work. Sometimes I use it in little small areas. And the same with this little 3/0 detail brush. Some people claim that I'm interested in painting an entire painting using this brush, and sometimes I think that I do, but it is great for shines or for getting in little teeny tiny corners, and you can even flatten it and make it into a very small flat. Great for water drops. And then this brush is a large flat, and it is used for basing in a large area. Personally, I like this for maybe working in large backgrounds. Anytime I need to fill in a large area, this big flat is just a must. But in general, I like to use the filberts for applying the paint because you don't get the chisel edge marks. So these are the different types of brushes. These are all from the Majestic line from Royal, and the filberts and the mops are part of the Kingsland Jabalisco Signature Series, all available at kingsland.com.
Welcome to our latest painting, aptly named Woman in a Boat. Probably could be called Woman in a Boat with a Dog. It is by James Tissot. He was a French painter, and he mainly painted women of the French society. He placed them in unusual settings, such as a boat with a dog in the back with an elaborate blanket on top, and really emphasized their position in society. Beautiful clothing, elaborate hats, and our benefit is that we get to explore his composition, we get to explore how to paint portraits, and what I really enjoyed about this painting is thinking about what makes this such an exciting painting, and we'll talk about that as we go through. But let's start right in with the star attraction, which is the face. You have written information, mix at least the colors for the face, and we'll get started. You have a couple of different things that you can look at to determine placement on the face. One, of course, is the final photo, and another is the black and white diagram. And the black and white diagram really helps you see the planes of the face. I'm going to start with the lightest value, and the lightest value just goes down the middle of her nose. I like to think of a a portrait a little bit like a sculpture, in that what is coming out toward us the most, and whatever's coming out toward us the most is going to be the lightest. And like I said, you can see that on that black and white photo and on the color photo as well, plus obviously right here. I'm using a Majestic brush. I like to use this brush when I'm trying to do very fine work. If I were doing a lot of scrubbing, I might switch over to one of the Sabletech brushes. Every time I paint, especially when I'm starting with a white canvas, I think to myself, oh, this just looks so dark. Well, in comparison to nothing. So don't let your logical side of your brain say, oh, that's so dark. It is not too dark. It will look much lighter once we put in our dark background, once we put in the hair, etc. It's just kind of an interesting phenomenon called one of Chevreul's laws, that all color is optical, completely affected by the surroundings. And so the surroundings are quite light, so this looks quite dark. I put in, at this point, while talking away, I have put in the medium value and the light value, dropping down, as you can see, to the next dark down. So I have light, medium, dark. Trying best I can to replicate the shapes that are somewhat laid out for you on that black and white. You can blend as you go if you wish, or you can wait. Our light is coming in from the right, therefore that tells us that the left side is going to be the darkest side. I'm letting this color go up into her hairline. Hair is translucent, therefore don't tightly paint around the hair up in this top area. Coming in and thinking about form. What is the overall shape of her face? It's actually a large sphere shape. Therefore, we need to have a crescent of dark starting on this left side and continuing on around on that underneath side. We will give this probably another coat, so if you're seeing a lot of canvas weave through, that's to be expected at this point. The ears are dark, and fortunately pretty much just one value. I'm actually going to make the one on the left, again because it's on the side of the dark, I'm going to make that one a little bit darker. And now I can come in and do some fairly strong darks that I've ignored. For example, when you paint a nose, you don't necessarily paint a nose. What you do is you paint the shadow that the nose creates onto the face. So that's that really great shape underneath her nose. To make her lips pop forward, I'm going to get a little bit darker on the underneath of her lip. And actually, I'm going to start her lips at this point, the top lip is darker than the bottom lip and smaller. The bottom lip is larger and a little bit lighter than that top lip. I'm avoiding the strong darks, but I know that just like everyone, I'm like, oh, it can't be that dark around her eyes. But you have to realize, as we all know, there's all of that bone structure around the eyes, quite dark around the eyes, to sink them back. Interestingly, eyes are actually sunk down into the face and have to be this dark. We will start off vague and come back in and get more specific. Now I can come in and do a little bit of wiping out. You can wipe out with a Q-tip, you can wipe out with a clean brush. But I lost that light down the middle of her nose. I lost this highlight. We're starting on this white canvas, so we might as well use it to our advantage. Going to actually start putting in her eyes at this moment, just so that we don't lose track of where they actually are. I'm starting off by, of course I can't leave the nose alone, I'm starting off by putting in the iris, the colored part of the eye, using a little bit of blue and a little bit of raw sienna. Then coming in with black, I'm obviously using a very small brush for this, and putting in her pupil. And one thing is that eyes, regardless of the color, have a dark line around them. Now the pupil has to stay perfectly round, the iris is perfectly round, and I painted them perfectly round, and she looks terribly surprised, and that's okay at this moment. I still have that little bit of black on my brush, and I'm brush mixing into the light flesh because I want to put in the white of her eye. I wouldn't use pure white because that would be a little harsh. Putting in the highlight in her eye. And a little bit of pass-through light in the lower left section. Like I said, I just kind of wanted to drop those eyeballs in because I had drawn them on and I didn't want to necessarily lose them. And what that does is it gives me the opportunity to say, okay, now this is where it needs to be pretty dark to create her lid. There's always going to be that little bit of a pouch underneath to show that the eyeball has, a fair amount of dimension that, a lot of it we can't see. Most of it we can't see. And what I have found to be the most common error is lips get too small and eyes get too big if you're not necessarily 100% paying attention to what you're doing. I'm adding in a lash line along the top. And what that's going to do is it's going to kind of show where the top of her eye is and not make her look so surprised. And a lash line is just the eyelashes, and because we're seeing them head on, they end up pretty much at this point just looking like a line going across. I've lost her lid, so I'm going to place that in with a little bit of light. Don't make the lid light all the way across because it has to curve and be darker as it moves away from the light. Again, strengthening the dark under the nose, really looking at that shape. Darker on the left side again because of the light source, which we have determined is from the right. She has a very thin nose, and that gets created to a certain effect by having some dark on the sides and then a lighter value down the center. And I kind of feel like my paint's getting a little wet and it's maybe not going to hold, so I can add more a little bit later. But this is the nose wing on this side, what houses the nostril. Notice the shadow is falling to the left side. And it's really not too apparent on the side of the light. I feel like her nose is getting a little big. Tiny bit of red for her lips to get those started. And again, your goal is the top lip is smaller and darker than the bottom lip. Well, I have the red on, I could put in those, sort of those tear ducts. The bottom lip, and this is seemingly working out because of working into that one wet underpainting. You can also do this when it's dry. But the bottom lip, a little larger. Lighter. It's interesting when you get things in, you see things, at least that's how it goes for me. And what I've noticed is that this side of the face, obviously much darker, but then has that great shadow from her finger. And the same with under the chin, just darker and rounder. Going back and defining those shapes again. Starts off looking so mask-like. I think a lot of that is lack of hair. And I think without hair around it and lacking in eyebrows, I think this is a good place to stop on the face. We'll add in the hand and hair next. Did a little bit more wiping out on the face, as you probably can tell. Sometimes I have to do it off screen because then I can like really just stick my head in there and see what needs to be done. But I'm going in now on the hand, obviously that's right by her face. I'm going to drop in these strong darks first. And the interesting thing with hands is that you have to think of them not as shapes like cylinders, but think of them as cube shapes. And so you have the outside edges, which are dark because of the light source. Everything is very angular and not hardly blended at all because it's knuckles and cubes, not blended as if it were cylinder shapes. So if you blend this a lot, you're going to end up with the look of, I always like to say, just like little sausages. I feel like I'm missing a finger. So there's one, there's two, that one is coming down, and then we need that one coming up. And one thing I haven't mentioned yet is that sometimes it's very tempting on a face, like if you need to get a really dark area, such as under the chin or under the nose or under the lip, to come in with black. And at this point, and probably maybe not hardly ever on a Caucasian, would you come in with black on the face. I have this dark on my brush and I know that it's a lot, so I'm going to go up and re-emphasize a little bit on the face. But back to the hands. Placing in all of these strong darks first, and then I'm going to place in the strong lights. So for example, right on the edge of her palm, quite a bit of light. And the finger, I think I'm still missing a finger, but I'm going to have to figure that out in a bit. I like to call where I'm placing this light almost like the leading edge. Leading edge meaning like on an edge of a table or the edge of a cube. It's where the corner is. So we actually have that on our fingers. So I have that lighter value in, and I can come in and show where the thickness is of the fingers, where there's an actual edge or a cube shape because of the bones that are underneath. Drop in this medium value. A little bit more dark. And this also shows me where that really strong triangle of dark is. I like to use as big a brush as I possibly can that will straddle the space. And I'm sure you've noticed I'm painting this smaller than the original 24 by 36 just for the ease of filming. But even, I don't care what size painting I'm working on, I always try to use a brush that's bigger and feels slightly too big. Then you can just very easily come in and blend. Now I'm going to do some of the wiping out even though I thought I was being pretty careful in retaining those light areas. I hope you can see those shapes being created. Of course, we're going to paint this in 3 stages. This first stage is merely form. I think finally I have all the fingers. Then we'll come back and do detail work, and then we'll do any shines and shadows that might be needed. And so the goal on this first go around is just to create overall shape. Coming in and redefining her pinky. I think it's pretty tempting to go, oh, I'll just make a C shape there. It really has to be straight line, straight line, straight line. So when you're refining and defining fingers, avoid the temptation to just do a curved line on any finger. Maybe on children's fingers you could get away with that because they have that, just a lot of fat in their fingers. But as you get older, that's just not the way it is. So each one of these fingers, think angle. I also like to say, think about the bones underneath, and then when you do this wipe out, you're wiping out the bones, the knuckles. This is kind of running together on her face, and I think that's okay. Define it later. And I do try to paint one thing at a time, but if I have a color on my brush that I think might work somewhere, I'm going to pick it up and lay it in. I kind of like to work it all at once. Let me see if I can define these fingers slightly with the lighter value. But it gets saturated, and you have to respect the chemistry and say, well, it's not going to take any more paint. And your option is to dry it or let it dry. And stacking paint on top is only productive for a while, and then it does reach that saturation point. That's why I marvel that we as artists have to understand the chemistry of things also. And understanding the chemistry of saturation, that you have to add more paint on top or dry it, then you can add more paint. And that's the idea of going from very lean paint to fatter and fatter paint. It's very dark in this triangle of dark. I'll get it darker later, but using the darkest reinforcing flesh, we'll get it started, and then it won't look like a black hole later on. Okay, I think it's time to move on to the hair so that we can continue to analyze the face. I've gone in and base coated her hair with the mid value, and what you want to do with this is, base it in, have some highs and lows, fairly solid, however. I'm going to come in with burnt umber, which is obviously at the tail end of my flesh scale, and start some shading, just right wet into wet. Pick up a little tiny bit of black. And I'm going to shade in a few places. One is going to be all around the perimeter of the head. And when you put paint on top of paint, you have to go in with heavier paint, because of course the paint that's down is going to absorb the new layer. The hat is going to cast a shadow onto the hair, quite dark. Then the outside edge of the hair is going to be dark to make it curve back. It has an actual receding edge to it. Of course, down in the crook of the arm, it's going to be quite dark. This hair is far away from us. It's behind her. And you can only get so dark in one pass. If you try to do this all at once, it doesn't have the look of loose hair. You lose some of that luminosity. And overall, kind of thinking my way through this, overall, you want the hair that's on this left side, again, because of the light source, to be a little bit darker than on the right side. It can be fairly tight where it hits the background. We'll put in the background later, and we'll pull some of the strands out over that background. In a painting, wherever you have two dark values butting up against each other, slight blend. So that's what I'm doing on the where the hair is meeting the face. It's just a slightly blurred line. And I'm really blurring it with the ears. keeping her bangs a little on the vague side. And I'm going to come in and pull out some of the light areas. You can pull those out and create, a tiny bit of a curl pattern. You're going to make her hair look a little curly, a little natural. I taught this 2 times, once in California and once in Kansas, and we all agreed that we had to be careful that she did not end up looking like Farrah Fawcett or having modern hair. So I pulled out the light. Now I'm going back in with virtually no pressure on the brush and softening the look of the Q-tip-ism out of the picture. So I think her hair has form, has a little bit of flow to it. You can come back in and, now that you've established some curl patterns, you can come back in with some dark and darken underneath a few of them. So that is what we need to do on her hair, and the reason I wanted to get that in is because it really tells us a lot about the face, and I think that the face is not looking as dark. Of course it's going to be reworked, but I just love getting all that dark around, what that does to the face. I'm going to pick up a little bit of the hair color and put in some eyebrows. One thing with eyebrows is they start at the corner and angle out to go over that brow bone. And then because of the way our bodies are constructed, this is exaggerated at this moment, but this is where the darkest portion of the eyebrow, or the most visible part, is right above the pupil, the iris, because that's why it's coming out the most to protect the eye. So we want it fairly prominent right above the eye, but think about the shape of a head. It's curving, therefore the edge of the brow is going to start to disappear. It's not really disappearing, we know it's there, but what happens is because of the distortion that occurs in this area, it's disappearing from view because it's going around a curve. I'm a big fan of putting in correct eyebrows as soon as we can, because it just finishes off the face a little bit more, and in general it makes students feel a little bit better about the progression, that it's probably going to be okay. And as always, I like to continue to rework what I see when I see it. But I think we're going to stop here on the face and the hair, and it's time to move on to the dress. Kind of tough to tell, but I have base coated the dress with white that has just a dot of blue in it. You never want to use, and there's very few nevers in art, but a main one is you never want to use white just straight out of the tube or jar, depending on what kind of paint you're using. White is not a color. It always reminds me of maybe throwing bleach on something. That's what it'll do. It'll just completely bleach out your painting. It doesn't make it look lighter. It actually makes it look bleached out and not as vibrant. So always use white that has just a little bit of something in it. So I'm coming through and shading based on our light source the left side of the sleeve quite a bit. This is a cylinder shape. The top of the arm is on the side of the light, but we need it to roll back, so it has to be just a little bit darker. So it's not going to be as dark as the left side, and it's also not going to be as wide of an area. I think the tricky thing, painting anything that's white, is you want to get form, but your challenge is to not let it look dirty. And it will look dirty if the shading color extends out too far. So it really is a balance. So I'm again shading the side that's not receiving light. So it's going to be the upright or the underneath, anything under or on the left. This is, of course, where I wish I had dried the hair, or if you're working in traditional oils, allowed it to dry, but I didn't, and I'll just have to be careful. But placing some dark to create the division on these ruffles. And at this point, I'm just creating the cylinder shape of the arm. It's getting a little dark in here, so I picked up some of that base coat color again. This underneath arm that actually, to me, it looks a little disconnected. So I'm going to try to make sure it looks like it is connecting, but this underneath arm has to be pretty dark. And then again, blend where that underneath arm meets that top arm. Again, I like to use a relatively large brush. And notice in this case, large brush, I'm just using a portion of it. Anything that looks outlined, such as across the back here, coming in and blending. And just slowly working my way down, creating the different pieces and folds. I do like working wet into wet because it just blends so easily. Sometimes though, when you work wet into wet, like right in here we need it to be really dark, it ends up working against you in a way because you can't get it as dark as it needs to be because you're working wet into wet. So there's advantages and disadvantages. Creating a little look of a scallop in that area, which might have been better served down a little bit lower, but it's not going to happen a little lower. The dress does not have a lot of folds going on as it moves down. But we can give it, a few. And actually start to work in some of the cast shadows, so that's what is under her hand here. I could have base coated this white, so I'll give that a quick coat. As you start painting this, you find out there are a lot of lines. And some of them are dress, some are blanket, some are bustle. And you find them little by little. But here's a trick with any of these folds. This I want to make it look like an overlap. So I'm saying that this piece of fabric here is overlapping this piece of fabric here. So I'm going to blend it so that, picking up brown I think off my paper towel, I'm going to blend it so that it is soft on this edge, so soft on this edge, and then crisp on the overlap side. So this side is a little bit overlapped. So if it's a dent, you blend both sides, but if it's an overlap, like this is an overlap, I'm going to leave one side crisp and then blend out the other side. Here, let's say that's a dent or a dip, so I blend out both sides. Here's an overlap, so I'm going to pick up some black. So it's going to be crisp on the right and then blend a little bit to the left. Coming back with the base coat and making it just a little crisper on that right side. But that's how you can start to create folds. So if we wanted to put some folds in her arm, or almost like stress points, probably the best thing to do is some wipeout. Then a little bit of dark, and you can add the dark. See how that creates a little bit of a wrinkle? Because what it's doing by putting that dark right next to that light, and it's subtle and it's blended, is it's showing that there's a shadow from the light that I just put in. So if you have a bump up area here, you can have a little bit of dark underneath it, and that makes it look again like there's a shadow. This section up in here can have a little bit of the white base coat. And when you work on fabric, my suggestion also is always think triangular shapes. So, for example, on these ruffles, I want each ruffle to look like a triangle going down toward a pivot point or kind of a stress point. And right now that kind of looks like teeth. Mainly because I didn't get it triangular enough. So if you put in ruffles and they look like little teeth, what you need to do is rethink that and make them into triangular shapes. So now those looks a little bit more like ruffles versus teeth all in a row. And just like if you're painting a flower, if you have a flower painting experience, you aim everything down toward a pivot point, and that's what you want to do here. Is like choose a central point and aim it down toward that. And I feel like I say the same thing over and over, but there's only so much you can do at this go round because you can't only do so much wet into wet. But going back in, a little bit of a smaller brush and accentuating some of the darks. And that's the main thing on something this light is you have to accentuate the darks because you can't make it much lighter. Because white is about as light as you can get. Create a few of those, again, those ripples, and like I said, I kind of like to call them just stress areas. At this stage, if in doubt, keep it kind of soft and blended, because you can go back and make a line crisper very easily, but it's, other than painting it out, it's kind of tough to make a line blend it out again. Trying to add some width to this ruffle here because it can't be flush with the dress, but running into the not taking time to dry kind of thing. So I'll go back and figure that out. So I would say for her dress, we obviously haven't done anything with her bustle or the ruffle around her neck. I think this is, as always, I just keep working, but probably a pretty good place to stop, and we can add her hat and the ribbon on top. And if you're working in the Genesis, probably this is a relatively good time to dry, especially if you're picking up red. Okay, let's move on to the hat and the ribbon.